Hello everyone. Welcome to another touching story on our channel. Today, we have a heartfelt tale that truly showcases the power of innocence and compassion. It's a story about how a little girl's simple, honest plea shattered the rigid formality of a courtroom and touched even the most hardened of hearts, leading to a remarkable and unexpected outcome. We all face difficult situations in our lives, moments where we feel overwhelmed and unsure of what to do. Sometimes we expect judgment, and sometimes we expect the worst. But this story is a beautiful reminder that kindness can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes it takes the pure honesty of a child to remind us of our humanity. In today's story, we meet Martha, a hard-working grandmother who has taken on the responsibility of raising her 6-year-old granddaughter, Lily, after the loss of her daughter. Life hasn't been easy for Martha. Working tirelessly to provide for her granddaughter, she finds herself in a tense courtroom facing a parking fine she can hardly afford. As Martha stands before the stern Judge Reynolds, explaining her situation with worry weighing heavily on her shoulders, little Lily does something that surprises everyone in the room. Her innocent request not only changes the atmosphere in the courtroom but also melts the judge's heart, leading to a moment of empathy and transformation. What began as a day filled with fear and uncertainty for Martha turns into an inspiring story of compassion, support, and hope. Stay tuned to hear the full story of how one little girl's honesty changed everything for her grandmother and how a stern judge was reminded of the true meaning of justice. We promise this story will leave you feeling uplifted and inspired. And if you enjoy our content, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that celebrate the power of kindness. We'd also love to hear from you. What would you do in a situation like this? Have you ever experienced a moment where compassion changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below or send us your story via email. Let's keep this conversation alive and continue spreading the message of love and kindness. Our story begins in a quiet, tense courtroom. The air was thick with anticipation as Martha, a 67-year-old grandmother, stood before the stern Judge Reynolds. Martha was visibly nervous, her hands trembling as she clutched the sides of the wooden podium. She was holding her breath, trying to muster the courage to explain her situation. This wasn't just any ordinary ticket. Martha was facing a $150 parking fine that she simply couldn't afford. It might have seemed like a small amount to many, but for Martha, it was an overwhelming burden. Martha lived off a modest pension and worked part-time at a small diner to make ends meet. Despite her age, she had taken on the responsibility of raising her 6-year-old granddaughter, Lily, after her daughter passed away unexpectedly 2 years ago. Life had been tough, but Martha was determined to provide a loving and stable home for Lily, even if it meant working long hours and stretching every dollar. Standing in front of the judge now, she could feel the weight of all her struggles bearing down on her. As Martha nervously tried to explain why she had parked in a restricted area, Lily stood beside her, clutching her grandmother's hand tightly. Martha's voice trembled as she recounted the events of that day. She explained how she had been in a rush to get to the pharmacy for Lily's medication. Her granddaughter had been sick, and it was urgent. All the regular parking spots were taken, and in her desperation, Martha had parked in a restricted spot near the entrance. She had only intended to be in and out quickly, but the pharmacy line moved slowly, and before she knew it, she had received a ticket. The judge, known for his no-nonsense approach, listened with an impassive expression. His face was stern, and his eyes gave nothing away. The courtroom was silent, and Martha could feel the tension in the air. It felt as though every eye was on her, waiting for her to make a mistake or falter in her explanation. Just as she was about to finish, her hope slipping away with every word, a small voice suddenly rang out, breaking the silence. "Judge, can we have a sandwich, please?" Lily asked, her voice innocent and clear. The unexpected question left everyone in the courtroom stunned. Martha flushed with embarrassment, her eyes widening as she glanced down at her granddaughter. She knelt beside Lily, whispering gently that this wasn't the right time to ask for food. But Lily's eyes, full of innocence, made it clear that she didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. She only knew that her tummy was rumbling, and that they hadn't had time for breakfast because they were rushing to get to court on time. Judge Reynolds blinked, momentarily taken aback. His stern facade seemed to crack, just a little. He looked at Lily, who stared back at him with wide, unblinking eyes. The innocence of her question hung in the air, and for a moment, the entire courtroom seemed to be holding its breath. Martha's face flushed deeper, her heart sinking as she feared this interruption would make things worse for them. The judge adjusted his glasses, leaning forward slightly. "Did you say you're hungry, young lady?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. The courtroom, still silent, seemed to shift, the tension easing just a little as people watched to see what would happen next. Lily nodded, her small face earnest. "Yes, sir. We didn't have breakfast. Grandma was busy, and we were rushing here," she said, her voice sincere and without a hint of pretense. It was such a simple, honest statement, and it seemed to strike a chord with everyone present. Martha swallowed hard, feeling tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She had done her best, but in that moment, she felt as though she had failed. Judge Reynolds paused, then did something no one expected. He signaled to the bailiff, who nodded and left the room briefly. The judge's eyes softened as he looked back at Martha and Lily. "Courtrooms can be a long and boring place, especially when you're hungry," he said. "Let's see if we can fix that." Moments later, the bailiff returned with a small brown bag, and Judge Reynolds handed it to Lily. "Here you go," he said, smiling slightly. "Let's make sure you're not hungry before we continue." A murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Martha's eyes welled with tears as she whispered her thanks, her voice trembling. Lily beamed, clutching the bag as she looked up at the judge. "Thank you, sir," she said, her innocence melting even the hardest of hearts. In that moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted completely. The tension dissipated, replaced by a sense of warmth and humanity that no one had expected. Judge Reynolds, known for his strictness and adherence to the law, was taken aback. His stern face softened slightly as he looked at Lily, who stood there with wide, innocent eyes. He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward, addressing Lily directly. "Did you say you're hungry, young lady?" he asked, his voice unusually gentle. Lily nodded, her big blue eyes staring back at him earnestly. "Yes, sir. We didn't have breakfast. Grandma was busy, and we were rushing here." Her voice was sincere, without a hint of pretense, and it melted something in Judge Reynolds' heart. He took a deep breath, glancing back at Martha, who was now looking down, her face red with both worry and embarrassment. The judge paused for a moment, seemingly lost in thought. He glanced around the courtroom, taking in the surprised expressions on everyone's faces. This wasn't the kind of situation he encountered every day. The courtroom, usually a place of stern procedures and serious decisions, felt different now, softer, more human. He then did something no one in that courtroom expected. He signaled to the bailiff, who left the room briefly and returned with a small brown bag. The judge took the bag, handed it to Lily, and said, "Here you go. Let's make sure you have something to eat before we continue." His voice was kind, the lines on his face softening as he spoke. The entire room seemed to collectively hold its breath, astonished by the unexpected kindness coming from someone known for his strict demeanor. A murmur of surprise swept through the courtroom. Martha's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Judge Reynolds. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor." She had been expecting the worst, a lecture, a hefty fine, perhaps even a harsh reprimand. But this small gesture of kindness was something she hadn't dared hope for. Judge Reynolds nodded, his eyes still on Lily, who was now holding the bag with both hands, her face lighting up in delight. "Courtrooms can be very boring and long, especially when you're hungry," he said, smiling at the little girl. "Now, why don't you sit over there and eat while I talk with your grandma?" Lily beamed at him, her innocent joy filling the room. She walked over to the bench and sat down, eagerly opening the bag to find a sandwich and a juice box. The judge watched her for a moment before turning his attention back to Martha. His tone grew serious once more, but there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Mrs. Martha," he began, "raising a child is never easy, especially under the circumstances you've faced. I can see that you're doing your best for your granddaughter." He paused, then continued, "The law is here to serve the people, but it must also recognize the challenges they face. His words were measured, but there was an undeniable gentleness to them, a shift from his usual sternness. The entire courtroom was silent, captivated by the unexpected turn of events. Judge Reynolds, known for his unwavering adherence to rules, was showing something that went beyond the law, compassion. And in that moment, everyone present could see that the law, too, had a heart when wielded with empathy. The tension that had filled the air earlier was replaced by a sense of humanity, as if the walls of formality had finally come down, if only for a brief while. As Lily happily took her seat, munching on her sandwich, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The tension that had filled the air moments before seemed to dissipate, replaced by a warmth that no one had anticipated. Judge Reynolds turned his attention back to Martha, his expression now softer, almost fatherly. "Mrs. Martha," he began, his voice measured and calm, "I understand that life has not been easy for you. Raising a young child at your age, especially under such difficult circumstances, is no small feat." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "The law is here to maintain order, but it is also here to serve the people. Your intention was not to break the law, but to care for your granddaughter in a time of need." Martha listened, her eyes brimming with tears. She had come to court expecting the worst, a harsh fine, perhaps even a stern reprimand that would only add to her burden. Instead, she was hearing words of understanding and compassion. It was as if the judge had taken the time to see beyond the black and white of the law, to see the human being standing in front of him. Judge Reynolds looked down at the paperwork in front of him, the silence in the courtroom almost deafening as everyone waited for his decision. He tapped his pen lightly on the bench, then looked up at Martha once more. "Given the circumstances," he said, his voice steady, "I am dismissing this ticket." A collective gasp filled the courtroom, followed by a murmur of surprise. Martha's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Furthermore, Judge Reynolds continued, "I want to offer you some assistance. I have compiled a list of local resources for grandparents raising grandchildren. This includes support groups, financial aid programs, and educational resources for Lily." The bailiff stepped forward, handing Martha a sheet of paper. Her hands trembled as she took it, her eyes scanning the list. It was more than just a piece of paper. It was a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in what had felt like an endless struggle. She looked up at Judge Reynolds, her voice cracking as she spoke. "Thank you, Your Honor. You have no idea how much this means to us." Judge Reynolds gave her a gentle nod, his expression warm. "Sometimes, Mrs. Martha, the law must be tempered with compassion. You are doing the best you can for your granddaughter, and that deserves recognition, not punishment." He paused, then added, "I hope these resources help make things a little easier for you both." Martha's tears finally spilled over, and she nodded, her voice too choked with emotion to respond. The judge's kindness had not only lifted the weight of the fine from her shoulders, but had also given her something far more valuable, hope for a better future for herself and Lily. As Judge Reynolds brought his gavel down lightly to close the case, a sense of warmth filled the room. It was a moment that everyone present would remember, a moment when the law, often seen as cold and unyielding, showed its capacity for kindness and humanity. And as Martha and Lily left the courtroom, there was a new lightness in their steps, a sense that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. The story of what happened in that courtroom spread quickly throughout the community. It became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even those in positions of authority can be compassionate and kind. People began to talk about how a small child's honesty had brought out the best in others, even in a setting often associated with rigidity and harshness. Judge Reynolds' unexpected act of empathy struck a chord with everyone who heard about it. Local news picked up the story, highlighting the judge's compassion and how Martha's struggle resonated with many people facing similar challenges. In a world where many feel disconnected and unheard, this moment of genuine kindness touched hearts across the town. It wasn't just about a parking ticket being dismissed. It was about acknowledging the struggles that so many people face, often silently. The story inspired others to look at their own communities and wonder how they could help those in need. The judge's display of empathy encouraged community members to take action. People who had never met Martha were moved to lend a hand. Local organizations and neighbors came together, organizing support drives to help grandparents raising grandchildren, providing them with food, clothing, and even financial assistance. The impact of that single act of kindness began to ripple outwards, touching lives in ways that no one could have imagined. For Martha, the help she received that day extended far beyond the courtroom. She found resources and support that she hadn't known existed, and for the first time in a long while, she felt that she wasn't alone in her struggles. She joined a local support group for grandparents raising children, where she met others who were walking a similar path. The sense of community that had been missing from her life began to grow, and with it came a renewed sense of hope. Martha found herself smiling more, her steps feeling a little lighter as she realized there were people willing to help. Lily, too, benefited from the change. She made new friends at community events organized for children in similar situations. No longer burdened by her grandmother's constant worry, she began to thrive. Lily's laughter returned, filling their small home with a joy that had been absent for too long. The support they received allowed Martha to focus more on providing a nurturing environment for Lily, rather than constantly worrying about how to make ends meet. The story of Judge Reynolds, Martha, and Lily became a symbol of what can happen when people choose kindness over judgment. It showed that even in the most unexpected places, a simple act of empathy could ignite a movement of support and compassion. The courtroom incident became a conversation starter, encouraging others to share their stories and look out for one another. In the end, the actions of one compassionate judge uplifted an entire community. People began to realize that laws and rules are necessary, but so is the human element, the ability to look beyond the surface and see the person standing in front of you. The story reminded everyone that real change often starts with a single act of understanding, and that together, a community can create a network of support that lifts everyone up. Judge Reynolds, once known for his stern demeanor, found himself reflecting on that day in the courtroom long after the case had ended. The innocence of a hungry child had reminded him of why he chose this career in the first place. To serve justice, yes, but also to protect and uplift those in need. He realized that true justice often requires more than just following the letter of the law. It requires looking beyond the surface to see the people behind the cases. From that day on, Judge Reynolds approached future cases with a renewed sense of empathy, understanding that sometimes true justice means offering a helping hand rather than a punishment. For Martha and Lily, that day marked a significant turning point. It wasn't just about the dismissal of a parking ticket. It was about a community coming together to support them and about discovering that even in difficult times, there could be kindness. Martha had expected nothing more than a fine and perhaps a scolding from the judge, but instead, she found herself on the receiving end of compassion and support that she hadn't believed was possible. This act of kindness was a reminder that no one should have to face their challenges alone, and that there are always people willing to help if you allow them. Martha's life began to improve, not because all her problems were solved, but because she no longer faced them in isolation. She now had resources, a support network, and, most importantly, a renewed sense of hope. The support group she joined became a lifeline for her, offering her both practical help and emotional encouragement. Knowing there were others like her, struggling but striving to do the best for their grandchildren, gave Martha the strength she needed to keep moving forward. It wasn't easy, but it was no longer impossible. As for Lily, she learned an important lesson about kindness and courage. A simple request for a sandwich had changed everything for her and her grandmother. It showed her that even in serious places like a courtroom, there was room for compassion, and that sometimes the smallest voices can make the biggest difference. Lily no longer saw the world as a place filled with insurmountable challenges, but as a place where, with a little courage and honesty, things could get better. She thrived in her new environment, surrounded by friends, laughter, and the knowledge that people truly cared. The story of Judge Reynolds, Martha, and Lily resonated far beyond the walls of that courtroom. It became a reminder that while rules and laws are important, so is the human element, the compassion that connects us all. Judge Reynolds' decision to show empathy instead of judgment touched countless lives, inspiring others in positions of authority to reconsider how they approach their roles. It sparked conversations about the importance of compassion in leadership and the difference that a single act of kindness can make. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. We'd love to hear from you. What would you do in a situation like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below or send us an email. Let's keep the conversation going and spread the message of kindness far and wide.